Thank you for joining us for the webinar, Native Children and Families in Oklahoma Systems of Care. A couple of housekeeping issues, just to let you know. This is provided by INTAC under a cooperative agreement with SAMHSA. And so all of the material that's going to be presented today, except that of course is under copyright, is in the public domain. It can be reproduced and copied without permission. It is supported by SAMHSA, but it doesn't necessarily mean that what we're presenting represents the official views of, nor an endorsement by SAMHSA or the government. And in the event that something happens with security, we get hacked or something like that, the session will immediately end and it will not resume on the same link. You'll get a separate email that will go out to all participants with further instructions. So INTAC is made up of a number of partners, and you can see those here on the screen. This is our vision and all the services that we provide. All children, youth, and families living with and impacted by mental health challenges will have access to the resources and opportunities they need to thrive in a comprehensive and equitable system of care. We do everything from individual consultation to developing and providing practical tools. We do have communities of practices. We do customized coaching. There's a lot of things we do under INTAC to support the work that you're doing. There will be a follow-up email that comes after today's session where you will get a certificate of completion. There will be a copy of the presentation sent out, and this recording will also be posted on our website. There is a brief survey that happens after, and we encourage you to please complete that, because that informs everything that we provide throughout INTAC, and it helps us to improve what we are able to offer to the field. So today's session is Native Children and Families in Oklahoma Systems of Care. And I am going to turn this over to Geneva and the rest of our speakers.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for coming to our presentation. We're excited to be able to share our system with you and share some of the results and partnerships that we've been able to put in place to work with Oklahoma Systems of Care and Native families. I do want to take a minute and introduce you to my co-presenters, Dr. Dolores Bigfoot, who is a professor of pediatrics at the College of Medicine at University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Center, and Clifford Ahanis-Sipes, who is the TNTA coordinator at the E-team here with me in the University of Oklahoma. Dr. Bigfoot and Clifford, would you like to say hi?
Good morning. Thank you for attending and appreciate the interest.
Good morning. I'm personally really excited to be here and to share this information with you.
When we looked at some of our data, and E-team does what's called a participatory evaluation for all of our clients, where we are looking at their data and then going back to the people that actually provided the data and ask them to help us interpret it. And so Clifford has actually done several focus groups for us where we are taking data back. And Clifford, do you want to talk about the focus groups for a minute and this quote?
Yeah, so a lot of the quotes that you're going to see in here, they come from interviews and focus groups that were done with families that had participated in systems of care and received these supports. One of the things that really struck me a lot was in these interviews, the families and the caregivers were very, very excited and wanted to give this information. And I do a lot of focus groups and I do a lot of interviews, and some people are excited, but some are just, I guess I'll share this information with you. But I wanted to note that all the families that we talked to about this particular topic were really excited. And as in this quote says, our culture gives us such an advantage, and we have such a huge support system. And systems of care and wraparound, it requires support from an entire community, and the families that receive this services were able to fit right into that. And I think that quote really highlights that.
I do too. So in Oklahoma, systems of care, we are a statewide state. Funding comes from the Oklahoma Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services, and is distributed to communities and agencies across the state, where we are partnering with, all kinds of child serving agencies, family organizations, and behavioral health providers to work with children, youth, and young adults experiencing serious emotional disturbances. ODMHSAS supports, maintains, and grows systems of care by providing leadership, vision, infrastructure, resources, accountability, workforce development, and technical assistance. That's what we mean when we say a state-run state. We also say that all children's behavioral health services in the state of Oklahoma are under the Oklahoma Systems of Care umbrella, so that all of our children's services are imbued with systems of care values and approaches. And so ODMHSAS and its partners have expanded systems of care services across the state through federal funding, and through state funding, legislative and Medicaid, and ODMHS funding. And that's how we provide services across the state for children, youth, and young adults and families. I love this picture too. That little boy looks so mischievous in a good way, doesn't he? Clifford, Dr. Bigfoot, do either one of you want to take this quote?
I'll take it. So it says, because these boys are native, we didn't want them going anywhere else. That's why I took them in. You know how we joke, how we tease, how we laugh. You know how it is. Because of how unique we are as native people, I wanted them here so they wouldn't lose out on that. I wanted them here so they wouldn't lose out on that community that we have. And this is from a foster mom of 2 native boys, and she was also their, I believe she was also their aunt.
So when we look at the Oklahoma population by ethnicity, race and ethnicity, we then compare it to the systems of care population across the state. And so the U.S. Census data for Oklahoma in 2020 is not readily available by state, ethnicity, and age. So chart 1 is race and ethnicity data for all age groups in the state. Systems of care serves children, youth, and young adults aged from age 0 through age 25. So chart 2 represents that enrollment, ages 0 through age 25. So it's a little bit different population. While natives represent 8.02% of the state population, they represent 16.25% of systems of care enrollment. And you can see that with all of the groups that we're looking at here. The state population is 10.28%. Hispanic and systems of care enrollment is 4.23%. Black population across Oklahoma is 7.83%. And in systems of care, it's 12.81%. We could talk about the reasons for that. They're varied and multiple, but we're really going to concentrate on Native children and families for this. But I did want to show you what the population looks like, because we use information like this to take a look at differences in diagnoses by gender and ethnicity. We look at differences in referral, access to care, enrollment, mobile response, because we want to be able to identify any systemic issues that are getting in the way of Oklahoma children and families being able to find services. So if you look at this chart, it's a little bit complicated, but what we're looking at is males and females by ethnicity and by diagnosis. So they're not substantial. These differences are not substantial here. Native boys are diagnosed with ADHD at a higher rate than any other group except for Black boys. And Native girls are diagnosed with anxiety at a higher rate than other groups. I don't know if this surprises anyone when you look at this. If you look at the boys overall and the girls overall, you'll see that boys tend to come in with externalizing disorders, where they're acting out disorders. So things like ADD, ADHD, oppositional defiant disorder, conflict behavior disorder. Girls tend to come in with internalizing disorders, so anxiety and depression. So you'll see differences like that, and you'll see differences like that across ethnicity too. Does anybody have any questions about this slide?
I just want to add that I think when we see communities of color, such as Native and Black, we're going to have to consider the trauma histories and how these trauma histories impact how kids are diagnosed and their behaviors. And a lot of times there's some potential for misdiagnosing ADHD because of the trauma history.
Yes, yes. And we'll talk about trauma history and a little bit further in as well, because it really is important in how behaviors are expressed with different diagnoses. So this is looking at outcomes in school improvement. And so what we do with our assessments, we look at a psychometric measure where we're looking at clinically significant improvement over time, but we also look at what we call real world measures because they're easier for us to talk about with funding agencies, the state legislature, families. And so we're looking at reductions in days out of home placement, reductions in days absent from school, reductions in tardies, reductions in office requests for discipline, and reductions in expulsions and suspensions. So when we look at clinically significant improvement by ethnicity, gender, and school age, outcomes for Native children are similar. You will see this section here is Native. And so we're looking at elementary school, middle school, and high school. This section represents Black children, elementary school, middle school, and high school. Hispanic children, again, elementary, middle, and high, and then white, elementary, middle, and high school. The highest rates of clinically significant improvement at 6-month follow-up are experienced by Native middle school girls and Hispanic elementary, middle, and high school boys. That's right here. These are the 4 highest improvement rates. What's really interesting, and again, I would love to be able to put together a focus group, and so that's what we're working on. But if you look at the lowest rates of clinically significant improvement at follow-up, they're experienced by Black middle and high school boys and Hispanic elementary and high school girls. So it feels like there's a gender issue in showing up in the Hispanic data. But we have not gone back to talk to, we haven't had any focus groups around that issue, and we haven't talked with that population as yet. We've just sort of been identifying these issues. And so we started with focus groups with Native children and Native caregivers to find out what was going on. Does anybody have any questions about this one? Or any comments?
I would say just on the focus groups that I've done with Native students, there's been this consistent theme of if they just get the support that they need and have if they just get that community support, it makes a huge difference. And so that has been just the consistent theme that I have seen that keeps running through all of this, especially with Native children.
Thank you, Clinton. So now we're looking at this. These are the real world measures. This is the Ohio scale improvement, out of home placement days, days in school suspensions, and so forth. We use the Ohio scales measures for our psychometric measure, and we implement them at baseline in 6 months as long as the child is enrolled in systems of care. So you can see that 62% of Native children experience clinically significant improvement at 6-month follow-up. That's the highest improvement by ethnicity. Native children also experience the most reductions in self-harm and suicidal ideation. Those are really huge. I would like to give Dr. Bigfoot a minute to talk about suicidal ideation and Native children. She's really got some good information.
You know, I think we have, with our American Indian, Alaska Native populations, we have the, you know, one of the highest risks from 12 to ages 24. And so being able to have that supportive network is critical. And what we find is that the things that are most helpful, most effective, most beneficial when we think about support networks for youth, for Native youth, and I'm sure this works for all Native youth, is a sense of belonging, a sense of identity, a sense of connectiveness, purpose, and of course those communities that are responsive to the needs of children. And so this critical piece of recognizing youth who self-harm and the implications for suicidal ideation and suicide attempts and suicide completions is real critical. As we look at the population of Oklahoma, we have 39 federally recognized tribes. We also have within the American Indian, Alaska Native population in Oklahoma, additional tribes from that are residents of Oklahoma, but are tribal members from other states. For example, I am enrolled Caddo. My children are enrolled Northern Cheyenne, but they live in Oklahoma. So that's an example of you know, additional tribes, and there are probably well over 200 additional tribes that call Oklahoma home. And so there's a lot of there was a question about mixed race, and so I think what we see is there's several most of our tribes are of multiple heritage, but they identify as one or maybe two, but recognizing that where their enrollment is at is how they identify. And that sense of identity, that sense of belonging in terms of identifying as a particular member of a particular tribe, I think is reinforces the fact that they have a sense of belonging, a sense of knowing who they are when they can say, I am a member of this tribe, even though I have heritages in other tribes.
And also, if I can add this or just reinforce what you said on the explanation at the bottom, that last half where it says 62% of Native children experience clinically significant improvement at the 6-month follow-up, which is the highest percentage of improvement by ethnicity. Native children also experience the most reduction in self-harm and suicide ideation. However, Native children experience lower improvements in out-of-home placement and school suspensions. Native children's results may be impacted by institutional issues and foster care and school systems. And so if they're allowed to stay in their community and their family in that community gets the intervention and supports that they need, we see the improvements that we want to see. But if they're taken out of their community, we see that it doesn't work as well. And so it's so vital and so important that they're allowed to stay in their community and continue to learn who they are and support that family, support not just the youth, but that family and also the community that they reside in.
As an evaluator, I want to highlight that this is what we do with the data. We identify systemic issues that are getting in the way of good outcomes, and systemic and process issues that are helping to get good outcomes. In our data, you can see things like when you look at the impairment scores at baseline, you will see that Black boys are being enrolled in systems of care at lower levels of improvement. At lower levels of impairment, but higher diagnoses. And white boys are coming in with higher levels of impairment and lower diagnoses. So what that means is that white boys are not being identified in the system until their impairment is very, very high, which means that they're out there, in trouble and we're not providing services. On the other hand, with Black boys, you're seeing them identified very early when their impairments are very low, but they're being given some, big diagnoses like bipolar disorder and things like that. So it helps us understand that even in some of our processes where we think we have things pretty locked down, you go through a process to get a diagnosis, you can see that we are still dealing with preconceived notions about who gets to act what way. And the fact that two boys can have the same behavior, but they get identified as more or less, that behavior is identified as more or less problematic. It impacts the system, it impacts them, it impacts their outcomes. These are systemic issues that we have to address so that we can make sure our kids are getting what they need from us, right? Clifford, are you going to do this one too?
Yeah, I'll do this one. This is SOC made sure that my daughter is at the table for her treatment planning, and she has had the power to make decisions about her treatment. She wanted some cultural activities included in her treatment plan, and her FSP helped make that happen and helped her therapist understand the value of cultural activities to her mental health. And systems of care is all about being family guided and youth led. And this quote just sums that up, that it's not the providers who are driving the healing process. It's the young person, it's their family.
So this is what we've learned in our work in Oklahoma. And going back and asking Native families and youth and young adults too, not just parents and not just caregivers. The feeling is that systems of care and wraparound fit very well with traditional beliefs and values about the care of children. And in fact, traditional values about the care of children predate any idea of systems of care philosophy or wraparound philosophy. That means that that wraparound and systems of care principles are compatible with Native principles and care ideas about the care of children. Systems of care is family driven and youth and young adult guided. Families have a primary decision-making role in the care of their children, as well as the policies and procedures governing all care. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. I apologize. And then youth and young adults are engaged in equal partners in creating systems change. So we ask our families to help us look at their data for themselves, but also to help us look at their data and how we can use it to drive systems change and make sure that we have equitable principles in place for access to care, treatment outcomes. Systems of care focuses on the strengths of the child, youth, young adult, and family. And family and community are essential elements in Oklahoma tribal cultures. Dr. Bigfoot and Clifford, I'm going to let you guys take this one first.
So this is so family and community are essential elements in Oklahoma, the tribal cultures, including extended family members and those who are not blood relatives. Tribal elders, spiritual leaders, neighbors, friends, and the family team meetings increase the number of availability of supports. One of the things that I've seen in my years of working systems of care, but also just supporting families, was that the children who had the most non-paid professionals at the table helping them, mentoring them, and guiding them were the ones that usually had the best outcomes. I remember growing up in my native home, I was told that this is your uncle, this is your aunt, and as I got older, I found out we were not even related. And so, but I still have those relationships with them. I still call them auntie and uncle, and but those supports meant a lot to me. But also I've seen to where we will have very caring adults and a lot of parents who will tell their children to will tell their children something, will be trying to teach them something 100 times and it doesn't click, and then the cool aunt or the cool uncle says it and then it clicks for them. And that's what this principle is. And so it's making sure that it that they have as many adult helpers around them as possible. And it's not just the paid professionals, but also the neighbors, the aunts, the uncles, and people who can teach them who they are and help them guide who they are.
I think when you're not a part of that culture, you don't understand how much everyone takes care of everyone. My twins are 23. They just turned 23 this month. And when I was a brand new mom, they weren't even 2 months old yet, I got asked to go to the Pueblo of Acoma to do a training, and I was still nursing. And my boss said, take them with you. I'm gonna call the Head Start out there. I was doing a training for a Head Start program, and they couldn't find anyone else to do it. And so I was very apprehensive, because how many times can you show up with two, very young babies, and you're going to have to stop in the middle of this all-day training and nurse? And I was very apprehensive. I really didn't know what was going to happen. And let me just say that I couldn't have been made to feel more welcome. I had brought all kinds of things. And in fact, I had brought my niece with me to kind of babysit in a side room. And that did not happen. Those babies were passed around from person to person during the training. Everybody took a break when I needed to nurse, and my kids were so spoiled that day, and I think about that when I think about problem solving. I really saw that as a problem, that I was going to have to go out there because this training was necessary, and I was not, I had to bring two twins with me, and I really saw that as a problem. I didn't know how I was going to overcome it, and I was made to feel so welcome. And what was seen as a problem, what I saw as a problem, the people that I was training, the Acoma Pueblo members, just saw as an opportunity to be a community. And I always think about that. We have our perspectives and things like that, but if we are working with children and families from a different community, a different ethnicity, a different perspective, we need to access their expertise around strategies and problem solving. I mean, we're going to learn stuff too, right? We're going to learn from them. They're going to learn from us. It really was a very wonderful experience for me. I have pictures of it. My kids look blissfully happy sleeping on their new Acoma aunties.
Another thing I'd like to point out is that the reason why we're sharing this component is because in my experience within systems of care, whenever new families would come in, this oftentimes was not the first intervention that they have taken part in is oftentimes the third or the fourth or the fifth intervention. And it was common to see a attitude of, I like, we've done this before, we've been here, done that, this hasn't worked, this hasn't worked, that hasn't worked. And I can understand the frustration because, they've gone through several interventions or several providers. But whenever we do systems of care, I always describe it this way: is the most intensive outpatient service available. And the reason why it's so intense is because we're going to meet with I would say we're going to meet with you 2 to 3 times a week. You're going to come in and have a meeting with us, and we're going to include everyone we can that cares about this young person. And not only that, we are going to work with the caregivers. We're going to work with you, mom and dad. We're going to try to work with everyone in the home. And so that's really a lot. And that can sometimes intimidate people. But that idea of we're going to support everybody, and the expectations that they're going to be involved, and we're going to meet 2 or 3 times a week and have frequent contact with them, or contact as often as we can. If you can gain trust with them, then that's when the intervention becomes much, much more effective. And oftentimes, I remember growing up actually just yesterday, we had a family dinner, and we had many people come. Anytime that I invite my my mother over for dinner, all of my sisters come, and they invite their friends, and they're all aunties. But that same principle of bringing in all the helpers we can to support these children, and if you can gain the trust of an American Indian family, these principles can fit in. But gaining that trust is so vital.
Anybody have any questions?
Anita, there were some, oops,
Okay.
sorry.
Go ahead.
Hi, hey, it's Ashley. There were some questions about the data in what previous slide. Jessica asked the question, does your data include youth who are mixed race or American Indian alone only?
It contains both. We allow children, youth, young adults, and caregivers to identify more than one race or ethnicity. And then when we pull the data for that, their data might be represented in the bar chart for Native families, and it might be represented in the bar chart for white families as well.
Is it okay if I take this next bullet point too? Yeah. So the use of culture
after that,
adaptations. Oh,
And after you talk about this, I want to talk about cultural adaptations too.
okay. The use of cultural adaptations in the mainstream systems of care practices, such as wraparound and care coordination, crisis response and intervention, and therapy, adds cultural support systems to the family treatment team and plan. I was able to do a youth panel a few months ago, and we had a American Indian girl, young adult, who was sharing her experiences of going through services. And similar to what I described before, she had several interventions and had received different types of therapy. But then one of the things that her message was about was that she received therapy that was culturally adapted to her culture. And she talked about, I shouldn't talk about, one of the things she said was, I have received services before. I've gone to therapy before. I have talked to mental health professionals before, but this time it was different. This time I was able to learn who I was. I was able to learn about the things that happen in the greater context of who I was, and that was the most helpful thing to me. And so even our own Native children recognize that there's a difference whenever they are allowed and able to have things from their identity be incorporated into their treatment plans and models. And so it's so vital that we do that, because we not only see a difference in the outcome of their behavior, but they also recognize a difference in the quality of the care that we are providing them.
And just to add to that, as we look at the recognition of, we have various cultures, and that there's values that are associated with the various cultures, and so there may be common values, but how those practices are utilizing those values may differ. So those techniques, and currently, as we look at a lot of SAMHSA programming, the equity, inclusion, diversity, justice is coming into play as we look at the 988 rollout in terms of crisis response and intervention. We also have, as stated earlier, culturally adapted or culturally enhanced therapeutic models to support that cultural aspect of our families and children. So the cultural enhancements are being offered, and it might not be widespread, but certainly in Oklahoma, many of the tribes have culturally enhanced, or many of the tribes have access to culturally enhanced evidence-based models. So they get the effectiveness of the evidence-based model with the understanding of the cultural aspects that is meaningful for those communities.
I think it's really important that we acknowledge systems of care talks about coming from a strengths-based approach. And I think it's important that we acknowledge that culture and tradition and heritage, those are strengths. And as providers, as evaluators, if we're showing the people that we're working with that we consider that a strength for them and that we can marshal it so that it's a tool for us to help them, right? It's a tool for us to help them. And of course, it's a tool for them to help themselves. But it's just that sometimes the system or professionals, however you want to say it, we don't explicitly state that this is a strength. And we need to do that because of course it is, right? We're a strength-based model. Culture and tradition and heritage, those are strengths that we need to bring into the treatment planning. We need to bring it and talk about so that we're acknowledging it and they're reinforced, right? I think that that's really important and it's made a difference here. There's significant evidence across our system and across literature and research. And at the end, one of these slides has a lot more resources if you want to go and look at the research that's been done around this. But there's significant evidence to show that many people within culturally diverse communities are likely to utilize avenues other than professional therapists for dealing with mental distress, such as elders in the community and traditional healers, spiritual leaders, and things like that. All of those should also be considered a strength. Why can't the elders in the community, spiritual leaders, traditional healers, why can't those people be brought into the treatment team? Why can't their expertise be accessed to help the child and family achieve better outcomes?
And along with that, it's recognizing that there are a lot of activities, there's a lot of practices that are therapeutic in nature, therapeutic in the effect, but may not necessarily be a therapy. So recognizing therapeutic aspects of activities. Even, we know sharing meals with family members is helpful. It's good for good mental health. It's therapeutic, even though it may not necessarily be a therapy. So bringing in these community spiritual leaders, helpers and healers is part of that therapeutic strength that we can bring and encourage within our community.
So one of the things that I've seen, unfortunately, a lot is that there's many Native children that typically aren't taught who they are or where they come from or these things until an intervention's needed, and that's okay, because the most effective interventions are the ones that teach children who they are, where they are from, and their place within the community. And also our goal as mental health professionals should be building that support system around them for when we are no longer in their life. And so after they leave our services, after they graduate out, hopefully the community supports that they have afterwards, we are building those or reinforcing them when they are with us.
There is a question in the chat. Actually, there's a couple. TJ has asked, stating that he knows a good number of tribes don't participate yet. They're just starting up. And has your organization stepped out to partner with other tribes? And the second part of that is, how do they advocate for themselves? How are they able to provide peer-to-peer support for the community?
So let me take the first one. So E-Team, we're at the University of Oklahoma. We're the evaluators for systems of care. The Oklahoma Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services has a tribal advisory committee, and the tribal liaison for that several years ago asked us if there was any difference in the data. Could we tell anything about Oklahoma systems of care with Native families? And so we've done this for DMH for probably more than a decade. And we've really just kept that information here because, we thought it was specific for Oklahoma. Dr. Bigfoot, we invited Dr. Bigfoot to come down and meet with us. And I was talking to her about the things that we had seen. And she said, you need to be telling people that you've got data. That's, a lot of people think that, but you have data to show that. And so that was the whole driver behind this. I really didn't think that this was something that was a surprise to people. I mean, everything we've seen, this makes perfect sense, right? We know that this works. I have data going back 20 years. We've been doing this for 20 years in Oklahoma. So I have data going back that long. And so when she was talking about it, she said, you've got to get this out. And Dr. Bigfoot, you want to talk about the commission a little bit? I think that's coming up, but.
Yes, can we just say that I think as we think about cultural aspects, we need to recognize that spirituality, which are many based on our traditional ways, have those healing aspects, and that they certainly promote mental health. So yes, let's jump to the Commission on Native Children. I think it's about 2 slides down.
I'll come back to this.
Okay.
I do want to.
Yeah.
Well,
let's just go ahead and go through this, and then we'll.
And then you can talk about it. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, this is not our data. Remember how I said this has been around, and we just didn't really think that this was going to be a surprise or new to anyone. This is from the 2022 Kids Count book, which is produced by the Annie E. Casey Foundation. Racial and ethnic disparities continue to disproportionately contribute to troubling mental health and wellness conditions among children of colors. National numbers show that nearly 10% of high schoolers overall attempted suicide in the year previous to the most recent federal survey. 26% of Native high schoolers attempted suicide in the same time period. So you can see that the suicidal rate and the attempts are much higher than the general population. So we've got to be doing something, where we're looking at this and how we can leverage every tool at our disposal, including the strengths of culture and heritage and tradition. So these are the outcomes for Oklahoma systems of care. So there's a greater percentage of Native children, youth, and young adults who experience decreased self-harm and decreased suicide attempts. A greater percentage experience clinically significant improvement in problems and clinically significant improvement in functioning. And so taking all of that, what do we recommend? What would we recommend looking at the data and having worked, with this population? And when I say this population, I mean systems of care. What would we say? What would we say to help people understand? So we would say that behavioral health providers need to increase their collaborations across the tribes. A lot of times here in Oklahoma, tribal youth may get referred to tribal programs, and that's wonderful. But there are programs and services that are available to them as Oklahoma citizens. And we need to make sure that all of our providers are talking to each other. So ODMH-SAS is committed to establishing collaborative relationships with Oklahoma tribes, and it starts there. This is from their website, and you all know that there's been a lot of stuff happening around Oklahoma. What I want to say is this is what's explicitly stated on the DMH website, that the department acknowledges and affirms common goals with Oklahoma's tribal governments to eliminate health and human services disparities faced by American Indian populations. ODMH-SAS supports a holistic framework that reinforces, I won't read this to you guys can read it, but I think it's important that when people are explaining themselves in writing on their website, that's what we can go out into the world and hold people to, right?
And also, one of the things I would like to add about this, these statements and these acknowledgements are really important to share because families and children, but especially American Indian communities, they don't trust predominantly white institutions, and they don't trust outside organizations because of how much harm that has been done. And so it's so important that if you're going to work with an American Indian tribe, you have to state these things regularly and often, that we respect and value their sovereignty, their ability to self-govern, and their right to self-preservation, because there's no trust. And so it's so important that if we're going to work with them, that we have to build that trust.
When Clifford first started working with E-Team, he said something that really has stayed with me. I had an epiphany. And evaluators, we're always trying to figure out how to help people be really honest and open and vulnerable on those assessments, right? Because we can't really look at improvements if we don't see impairments. And so we're constantly having this conversation about how to engage. And Clifford said, don't put the work on them, put the work on you. You have to be trustworthy. And that was really a different perspective to me. I mean, I feel like I had been, but I hadn't been thinking about it that way, right? And so I've said that to several people now. When we're engaging, we have to be trustworthy. We can't just walk in and expect people to trust us. And I think that any partnership is like that, right? But that really was significant for me, and that was an eye opener, Clifford. So I want to give you credit for that. So we would say that behavioral health providers, not just in Oklahoma, but across the nation, need to increase your knowledge and competency around Native cultures and collaborating with tribes at the state and local community levels.
I think one thing, the advantage that Oklahoma has is that several governors back, this governor at the time established an MOU with the state and the tribes to provide to increase collaborative efforts. So that was an agreement that's still in place. So that local communities and the state levels at least have the written initiative to say that they will collaborate at the various levels.
And also, this one right here says Oklahoma Systems of Care values family voice, choice, and acknowledges that Native families are experts on their families, and that expertise can support the strength of behavioral health outcomes for children, youth, young adults, and families. And I absolutely love that. This is slightly off topic, but it reinforces this point. There was another youth panel I got to be a part of Native youth. And one of them was the valedictorian of the local American Indian boarding school that is currently functioning right now, and that school is ran by American Indians, and we all know hopefully we're all aware of just the awful horrific history of American Indian boarding schools and what has happened, and that was a setting of non-natives being in control and controlling Native children and all of the dysfunction and the atrocities that happen from that. But today, now it's ran by other Native Americans who are serving and teaching and learning with Native children. And the valedictorian said something like this. She said, there are, we do have problems. There are mental health challenges. There are these issues, but this place has taught me so much about who I am. It has given me strength and helped me overcome these things. I have a support system. This is my family. And she shared just the positive impact that her experience was today. And I wanted to share that because when Native families or Native communities whenever Native people are allowed to be in control of their own future and their own children and to drive and to drive the process forward, that's when we get the outcomes that we want. That's when we see the positive outcomes, the growth, and all those wonderful things that we want to see. And again, that wasn't from the professional's perspective, that was from a 17-year-old. And so again, it's not just we see it in the data and the professionals see it, but also young people also see the improvement in the quality as well.
I do want to finish this because I want to make sure we get through all of it, and I don't want to keep you all. But TJ, I see your question about peer-to-peer support and advocate. So I'll get back to that, okay? Because I think Clifford is very well placed to answer that, and I've got some feedback as well. The SOC toolkit also talks about the fact that children, youth, and young adults living with serious emotional disturbance have not received clinically, socially, or culturally competent care. So when we are offering and providing culturally competent care, we can help provide, or we can help families access services within the context of their home and community. And that, again, gets us to a strength-based approach and allows us to value those strengths and marshal them in treatment plans and things like that. So people talk about cultural competency a lot, right? You might have even had classes in it or something, and it's become kind of a, whatever. So I would encourage you to think of that as more than competency. What it really is the ability to respond respectfully and effectively and value people who are different than you are. It's just going out in the world in a manner that recognizes, affirms, and values the worth of individuals, families, and communities, and allows for the protection and preservation of the dignity of all of us. That's what cultural competency really is. We're never going to be experts in another culture, right? But we can be always learning. We can be respectful, and we can let people know that we value their perspectives. So operationally defined in systems of care, cultural competence is the integration of knowledge about individuals, families, and groups of people into specific standards, policies, practices, and attitudes used in appropriate cultural settings to increase the quality of services, thereby producing better outcomes. Again, when you organizationally define something, you're putting something in print, you're talking about it so that everyone in your system understands the standard. And that's very important, that we all understand the standard by which we are all being held and expected to conduct ourselves within. So these are some more recommendations. And this is this is our tree of life. I think that, trauma, these roots may not be beautiful. This is what trauma does to us, but look at all the systems of care people blossoming on that tree. So we need to be aware of historical trauma and culturally competent, that historical trauma informed and culturally competent, and the treatment needs need to be adjusted to be culturally appropriate. And this is some of what Dr. Bigfoot was talking about around trauma-informed care. Dr. Bigfoot, Clifford, you guys have anything else to add to that?
I think as we become more aware of the impact of trauma, I think that we have always known that there's things that don't go right when there's been horrendous events in our lives. And so intuitively, we understood the adverse childhood experience outcomes, but now with science and with data like this, we recognize the impact of adverse childhood experiences and how important that recognition is. So, it's a term we use in Indian country is being a good relative. So this is the equivalent of that trauma-informed understanding, is being that good relative, recognizing that you're being responsive to the needs of someone who is in need of care and attention and thoughtfulness. So recognizing that prevalence of trauma is important. And I'm going to have to jump off because I'm going to be hosting another Zoom call. So I'm going to turn it over to Agnes.
Thank you, Dr. Bigfoot.
So this next one says, Native families are also impacted with historical trauma defined by historical loss, symptoms, depression, substance dependence, diabetes, dysfunction, parenting, unemployment. As a result of the cross-generational transmission of trauma from historical loss of population, land, and culture. And so the trauma history and trauma impact is very, very high in Indian country. That's not a surprise with all the different challenges, but it's so important that we address all of those things, that this doesn't happen in a vacuum. And the last thing I'll share about the recommendations from my perspective is that, this is for American Indians, and it's American Indian perspective on this. And what I feel is that this has so much to offer, not just Native communities, but everybody, that the principles that are shared here can positively impact every group and every provider and every community and every family and every youth. And so please don't just put this in a framework of this is American Indian, so it only applies to American Indian people. This can apply to everybody, and it should apply to everybody. Everyone has something to offer.
Does anybody have any questions? I do have one more little thing I'd like to say. It's not a part of the presentation, but there's a big movie that's getting ready to come out. It's called Killers of the Flower Moon. It was a best-selling book. It's going to get a lot of publicity. It happened in Oklahoma, and it is actually the Osage called it the Reign of Terror. And if you go see that movie, I would like you to think about how what happened in that community is still impacting physical health outcomes, mental health outcomes, trust in the system. If you don't trust the system, you're not going to reach out for help. I just encourage that actually happened in Oklahoma. And it's a way for us here in Oklahoma to look at what we can do in our own state. And you probably, if you're from outside of Oklahoma, I'm sure you have instances like this too. But what we can do in our own state to understand the trauma and the ongoing repercussions of that trauma. And so every time we are interacting with a child, youth, young adult, or family member, we need to keep that in mind. And as Clifford said, we need to be trustworthy.
We have a question. Can you speak about the degree of recognition SAMHSA System of Care application reviewers understand these points? Do applications need to highlight these points, or are they understood by review panelists?
So I don't know the latest round. I don't know if you all know how this works, but they usually come out with applications, and you can apply to be a SAMHSA reviewer. And it might be for 3 years or 5 years or whatever. So I have no specific knowledge about who is doing that, but I would say to you that I think most of those reviewers are not people of color. They're not well versed in looking at different kinds of trauma. A lot of times when you hear providers and PhDs and people like that talk about trauma, they're talking about growing up in poverty or growing up in a house where there was substance use. You know what I mean? They're not talking about historical trauma. You really have to go out and ask for that education. You have to ask for that. You have to seek it out, right? I'm from Oklahoma. I was born and raised here. And I did not know this story until the book came out. I grew up an hour and a half away from Tulsa, and I went through the school system in Oklahoma, and I would tell, I would tell you that I had a good education. I did not know about the Tulsa Race Massacre. We are not teaching people those things. I did not know about the Tulsa Race Massacre until that show on HBO came out. What was that called?
Watchmen.
Yeah, The Watchmen. And I thought, is that real? And I went to look it up. And as a result, I took my kids and my family. We went to Tulsa. We went to look at that neighborhood and to understand that. And Systems of Care is actually working with some providers who are already in that area, but have not had the state level support for those services. When you look at locations where there's been historical trauma like that, you can see the effects. That location is in North Tulsa. To this day, Black people in North Tulsa have higher incidences of heart disease, hypertension, mental health, There's, redlining happened in Tulsa. I mean, there are still things that are happening and people are not aware of them. So I don't know for sure, and I don't have any Samson names, but I would say to you that we don't do a good job of saying, hey, look what's been done. And you have to go out and educate yourself and ask those questions. And so I think that when you're making those, if I were to write a grant, and we do here at ETM, we write many grants. I always make sure that they understand where we're coming from, why we're saying what we say. I have the stories to back it up, because a lot of people don't think about data. They need a face or a person to kind of hang the data on so they can see a story. But I also make sure that it's not one person's story, that I have the data to back it up, that you can see it all the way through. There is a difference. I want to make sure that they understand, like, they're not coming out here to Oklahoma. Who's coming to Oklahoma? You know what I mean? I love Oklahoma, but I was born and raised here. When I see people come to Oklahoma, I'm always like, why? So I just try to kindly educate people about some of our not shortcomings, but some of our challenges. Rural means something different. Rhode Island is a statewide state. What is Rhode Island? It's like less than 2 hours across. In Oklahoma, in the Panhandle, there are people in the Panhandle who go to Kansas or Texas for services because they're closer than any Oklahoma service. Those are not just rural, that's called frontier. So we try to educate people. We try to educate people about having 39 federally recognized tribes. So I think it's a good idea to make sure you're telling them what they need to know. And I wouldn't make any assumptions about things like that. And if you all need help with anything like that, just give us a call. Clifford has been here a little over a year now, right, Clifford? Feels like forever for me. I actually recruited him from DMH because of the work he did around those focus groups with youth and young adults. I was very, very impressed. And so as he's come and we've been looking at the data, he also has talked to me about working with states and tribes outside of Oklahoma to do this, because a lot of systems of care sites are like, there'll be a tribe funded or there'll be a county funded. Because we're statewide, I have data on all the ethnicities who are receiving services, all the age groups, I've got all this data, so we can look at differences like this. If you are a Native tribe and you're implementing a grant like this, all you have is Native data. You need the comparison groups, right, to be able to say, these are systemic issues that are inhibiting and getting in the way of successful outcomes for children and families. And systemic issues absolutely exist. They exist along historical trauma, gender, ethnicity, all kinds of things like that.
Geneva and Clifford, I want to just say thank you both so much for this amazing presentation and sharing this information with us. I also dropped in the chat the link to the testimony, the written testimonies, and I'll add that again. And I want to thank everyone that's here today for joining in on this session. Please participate in the post survey that will open at the end of this session. It helps us at INTACT be a little bit more aware of the sessions that you all are interested in learning about and having put on throughout the year. So again, please participate in the post survey, and thank you to Geneva, Clifford, and to Dolores. We appreciate your time.
If you want to scan that QR code, you'll have eTeam's information. You can contact us.
Awesome. All right. Well, I hope that you all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you very much. Bye, everyone.